Good morning, everybody. Hope all of you had a good week. It's good to see my weight coming down. A lot of the fields, the corn's coming out of those fields, so it's good to see that. So hopefully the weather stays good so the farmers can get their crops in. Several years ago, there was a book called The Packaging of a President. It was a book that detailed how politicians are trained to practice their hand and eye movements on the stage, the way they talk, and proper dress to make the most favorable impression, and gestures to use to make them appear honest, open, and concerned. And the things that were so very important in creating their public image as they face the camera, the press, and the voting public. Well, in today's gospel, Jesus warned us not to put our too much faith in the public image that all of us like to impress people with. In Matthew's gospel today, Jesus exposed the scribes and Pharisees as being phony and hypocritical because Jesus said they do everything for public attention. All they want to do is impress people. They are not sincere and genuine. They do not practice what they preach. And we listen in that gospel, it said Jesus accused the Pharisees of placing incredible burdens on people who came to them for spiritual direction. Also, he said had long decorative tassels, the things they called phylacteries in old days. On that end of that tassel, they had a long and decorative and looking nice. It was kind of a way of showing their authority. And so they liked them to be very displayed so people would see who they were. And they also liked to be called rabbi, a title which meant the great one. And they loved that. And Jesus, he really gave them a hard time for that. He said, they're all show. And you can see why the Pharisees and Jesus always were tangling, because he kind of saw right through them. And he was kind of correcting them and scolding them and criticizing them because they were pretending to be what they were not. In our gospel today, Jesus teaches us that humility is indispensable quality of good character of Christian life, because humility consists of two simple truths. The first one is our nothingness and sinfulness of ourselves, and secondly, God's greatness and the things that God can do in and through us. So you and I, we're simply instruments in God's hands. So humility is so important in our spiritual life as Christians. We cannot do without it, because humility is simply seeing ourselves as God sees us, understanding that all of our gifts and all of our talents come from God as a pure gift from God, and that we depend upon God for everything. In other words, there's no such thing, not that we think I'm a self-made man or woman. There's really no person is a self-made person. Everything we have really is kind of a gift from Almighty God. Last week, the kids had their trick-or-treating, and they put their costumes on. Maybe the girl, maybe it's Cinderella, the boys as Frankenstein, or one of the zombies, whether they went out, however they went. And they go to people, grandma's house maybe, or neighbor's house, and they have a little bag of trick-or-treating, and they kind of want people to, kind of guess who they are. And so they kind of pretend to be someone they are not. And Jesus said, we can't be like it. We can't be on this Halloween thing. We can't pretend to be what we are not. We got to be sincere and the kind of individual that way. You can't fool God. We can fool people. These little kids, when they were out trick-or-treating, maybe they might fool some of the neighbors with their costumes, and some of them are rather elaborate. So I'm sure that maybe they fooled some of the neighbors, maybe even grandma and grandpa. But he says, you can't fool God. You can't fool Almighty God. And so in our gospel today, Jesus kind of gets upset at these scribes and Pharisees that he admits, he said, they do know the law, and they do preach the law, and they are very knowledgeable in the law, and they do a good job in that. But he was upset with them because he said, don't follow them, though. They don't practice what they preach. So he said, they know what is right and wrong. They know the law. They are good at it, but don't do the way they do. Don't practice what they preach, because they're hypocritical. They're not sincere in what they do. And so Jesus got upon and gave them, just a hard time because of that. He said, if you're really going to be a follower of mine, we've heard that same thing all of it, you got to be a servant, of service to other people. Jesus said, he who exalts himself is going to be humbled, but whoever humbles himself will be exalted. So Jesus is simply reminding us, if we want to be good and holy in God's eyes, that the starting point is humility. The acknowledgement that who we are, whatever talents we have, they're all gifts from Almighty God. I don't care what you can do, all your great abilities. Whether we're, great surgeons, or great with the computers, We're great at cooking, fantastic cooking things. Our minds are just amazing how good we are. Everything we have and any talent we have, it said, really and truly is a gift from Almighty God. And how we use those gifts, that is so very important in our life. And that's why being of loving service to one another. One time St. Augustine, he lived in 354 to 430. He was one of the great scholars and the saints in the church. Somebody was writing about humility, and somebody asked about, the most important thing. He said, Augustine said, if you ask me what are the surest and the truest ways to God, I would tell you there are three ways. The first way is humility. And the second way is humility. And the third way to God is humility. So in other words, if you don't have humility, you're not going to get there. That is the most important thing in our life. Realize that everything we have, everything, is a gift from Almighty God. And how important it is to acknowledge God's gift to each and every one of us. So humility, I say, is kind of the cornerstone of growing in God's love and God's grace. So that's each one of us kind of work on humility. Not false humility, but realize simply acknowledging that God has blessed us in so many different ways. And don't pat ourselves back and say, oh my, how wonderful I am, how great I am. No. Realize everything we have is a gift from Almighty God. And so each day, thank God for our gifts. Each day, try to use the gifts that God has given us in the proper way for the good of God, the service of others.